Hi, welcome to Day 10 Online School and Create. In Day 9, which is the previous lesson, we continued exploring CSS by reviewing or by studying specifically the box model of the CSS or the CSS box model. Then we also went through to learn what positioning is all about and the display. How do we actually change the display of the HTML elements using CSS? So in today's lesson, our focus is going to be on something a bit more advanced when it comes to CSS. So I'll go to my dashboard. It might happen that you face situations whereby you have to lay out your content like I showed here. So like this. So based on what we said yesterday, it can still be achieved by changing the positioning and the display. So with basic displays like floating or relative positioning, we can still achieve that using the margins and the tops and lefts. We can really adjust to get things like this. But there are better tools and easier tools, I would say, to help us achieve that. So today we are going to discuss these particular tools that are used for advanced layouts. So also you can have a website which has this layout, for example. So you have a sidebar here, then you have your header here. So the navigation could be here, and the main content could be here, and then that's the header here, sorry. So some kind of header, and then you have your navigation somewhere here. So you can have this kind of layout, and in general when we look at the website, they are laid out in this kind of fashions. So this can become a bit difficult to achieve with just positioning, and this is why we are going to discover two main tools, two main features used by CSS to help us achieve great and advanced layouts. And before we continue, I would like to discuss something very interesting when it comes to how our HTML tags are structured, which concept is very important in understanding the two things we are going to learn. Let me mention these two things first. So we are going to study what we call the CSS Flex box or Flex. Then we are also going to study the CSS Grid. So these are the two things we are going to see throughout this lesson. But before we go in, like I said earlier, we need to understand the hierarchy in HTML tags. Throughout our class in HTML, we learned something with what we call nested tags. So where we can have a tag inside another tag and so on. So this can happen. So for example, when we have a UL tag, it has LI tags in it. So we have LI, and then it goes, then we can have another li. So this is the concept we call nested tags, but there's also another way of calling these tags. So in this structure, if I close the ul here, the ul tag is what we call the parent tag. So this parent tag, and then the li's or here, all these immediate li's are what we call the children. So these are children. So if it happens that one of the li's, let's assume, contains another tag inside it, let's say a b tag, and then the b tag closes inside the li. So we close the li somewhere here also. Then this b tag becomes the grandchild of the ul, or the ul is the grandparent of the b tag, and then the li is the parent of the b tag. So this hierarchy of parent and children is very important in understanding the flex and the grid. So if you get this idea, that's the basic idea there. So when we say immediate children, these are the immediate children. So the children of the children are simply grandchildren. So they are not immediate children. So now let's move on to the first concept, which is the flex. So what is the flex or the flex box? So basically what HTML CSS does using this concept is it allows us to change the display of an element like we did yesterday by using the keyword or by using the rule display. So we say display. Remember in the previous lesson we spoke of inline block or inline block and so on, and I mentioned partially that we could also get different ways of changing that display, which is flex. So we can change the display into flex or we can change the display into grid. So either ways we are going to discuss two different concepts, but they all allow us to lay out our website. So the next question you might ask right now is, where do we write this and why? So basically the concept of the grid and the flexbox is this. First of all, they require a parent element. So in our case, for example, this parent element could be a UL. So that's the UL here. And then the UL could contain children elements. So for example, the first list here, the first list element, the second list element, and so on. So all these are children. So before you can use the flex display, you must have organized your HTML tags in this fashion, which is to have a parent element and then children element. This architecture is very important. So let's look at it in the HTML with CSS and how it works. So for that, I've created my folder, my day10 folder here, and then inside it I've also created a basic file HTML index.html, in which I've just entered this basics HTML code. So in here we are going to try to use our CSS Flexbox, and we'll insert some embedded CSS here. So we're going to call it star tag, and we will write our stars here. So far, let's now think about structuring any HTML elements in this fashion. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a div tag, and we'll give it div. So that's going to be the parent element. So let's call it, we'll give it a class of parent. Then inside that div, we are going to insert some other elements. So let's say we insert another div, that's the first chart. So we say first chart. Then we do the same thing for 3, second, third. So we have 3 children inside this element, which is the parent. So if we go now, we target the element parent by using .parent, and then we say border, so that we can see the border 1 pixel solid. So let's use dotted, and then we use a different color, let's say gray. So we can now go and preview the page by double clicking. So we can see the parent element showing up and then the children inside it. So by default, you can see the children, as like we said, they're actually laid down. They are laid one after another because they are block elements. So if we go in, we now say, okay, we'll group the functions here, we'll group it. So we say for the parent tag and for every div inside or next to it, we want to also display the border, and this time we are going to do it dashed. So we refresh and we see, so we can now perceive the children inside that parent element. So now what happens if we change the display of the parent element into a flex element? So we do flex, we go back to our browser, we refresh, and you can see. So it actually breaks the normal flow, the default flow of all the children, and tries kind of to change them into inline block elements. So this is not necessarily what we might want. We might just not want it to go one after the other. We can change that. So that's what we call the direction in which the element can flow. So if we set that this parent should be flexible, now all these elements inside become indeed flexible. So we can now change the flow, how they move. So we can decide to say align yourselves like this or align yourselves vertically like this. So we can change that flow, and we use the directive flex direction, and we have column or row. So the default is the row, and that's what we just saw there right now. So if I change this row into column, and you can see it comes back to the default. So the other beauty thing we could also do, let me cancel this one for now, is to decide. So once the elements are also, like I said, they are floating, we can imagine them floating around the axis like this. So we can decide in this axis how they move, and on this axis how they move. So for this direction, we use the justification. So just like the way we justify text with Microsoft Word, so are you going to justify it left? Are you going to justify it right? Or are you just going to align it at the middle? So this is what one thing we can do. You can, if you can remember what I did earlier on when I did, let me remove the direction and save. So the first state, you can see that they are aligned at the left side. So by default, they are justified at the left. Can we change that into the right? So we can now use justify content, and we'll say end or flex end. You can see by doing that, it goes at the right side. I could also say flex start, so that it justifies it at the beginning. So the flex start is the default. Now I could also say space between or space around or space evenly, as you can see here. Space between, and you see it will distribute them equally to fit the whole space by creating the necessary spaces around, in between them. So if we use space between, sorry, space around rather, so you can see it actually creates the spaces, that adds the spaces around them rather than in between them. So we can play with these things. So now for the alignment, the vertical alignment, we use align items. So we do align items. So the same thing goes, we can decide to make them align at the top completely, or align at the middle like this, or align at the bottom. So these are the possibilities to we have, just like we have with the justification, content justification. So align item, let's say center. So this will try to keep them at the middle. So this is important. We can notice this when the content of one of the boxes becomes considerable. So let's assume I add some content. So you can see they are still aligned at the middle. You can see that their alignment is in the middle. So let me still add some text and see. You can see it's still keeping them at the middle of the one that is large. So if I change that into flex end, you can see it goes at the end, which is at the bottom. It starts the alignment from there. So the same thing, I could say flex start, and that will be at the beginning. So I can also say so let me find stretch. So you can also say stretch, and it will actually try to stretch the containers and fit it. So this tool can actually be used to create all sorts of layouts you might think about. So imagine a website where we have, let's see, we go to men's course. So if you have a website that has this navigation, so you might want to have this content aligned, either justified with the spaces between them and so although in this case it's a bit tricky, because you can see this portion is grouped, and it is actually standing as one element. It stands as one element. Now it is spread with the spaces between, uh, along with the other three, so which is the name, the dashboard, and the French version. So it is still the same principle. You see this grid of articles here is the same principle that is used. Particularly on this design, I use flex only. I did not use any grid, only flex. So the same thing you can see, that's what we use to achieve these things. The site's layout or all other pages layout is still through Flexbox. So this layout you see here, the column of the article, the sidebar, all this is achieved with Flex. So these are the basics about Flex I would like us to look at. So we'll probably have the chance to explore more. Like I said, I don't want to load your brain with something that will make you discourage you. I want you to simply understand the principle and have the basics. And that's why you see that this up to now, as I haven't taken time to explain all these rules one by one, and how they are structured, what are their various parameters. So I don't want you to frustrate yourself. Keep it simple for now. Learn these basic principles and the possibility. No, remember that there are these possibilities for now. One day you will remember whenever you need them, and you will come back on them. So that being said, let's move to the next element, which is the grid. So the same thing happens with the grid element. We just have to get a parent element, and then we change the display of that parent element into grid. But the grid is a bit different. It works a bit different, and it's kind of more flexible compared to the flex element, the flex properties. So what happens is that when you are creating and you change an element into a grid, it will set up some kind of columns. So it will set up columns. So by default, it will create one column like this, and then one row. So just like we do with tables, so you have a virtual column, a virtual row, then a virtual column, or will give you one cell, right? So it means if you had one element inside the parent, you just get one cell. So if you have two elements, it will create another cell for the second element. If you had three elements, it will create another cell for the element. So by default, the grid element will actually flow its children as just columns or rows in one column. So just rows in one column. So it's actually the same like the CSS Flex did. So let's actually have a look at what we can do with the grid. So I will I'll keep this one. Let's see. Okay, let me keep it, because I would like you to have the source code later. So I'll create a different element here. And here we'll name it D. So let's use a list UL, and then UL will be the parent, and then we'll have LI, and then inside the LI we'll have the A tag. So for each one of the A's, we'll have, let's say, home, about, and contact. So we'll have that. And since the UL is unique on this code, inside this code, I don't have to give it a class. I can directly target it by saying UL, and that's going to be the parent. And we'll do the same again we did here by giving it some border, so that we can distinguish it and see it well. So that one will make it dotted, and we'll make it yes. We'll keep it gray. So we're going to refresh, go back to our page. So we can see the grid here. So you see it shows the UL as a block element, and we can see the dotted borders. So we go back. Now we set so once we are done with that, we know that the LIs by default are also block elements, so we don't really need to do much. So we do UL LI. So that's the LIs inside this UL. We want to remove. So let's say we want to remove the list star type, that's the bullet. So list star type none. So we want to remove the bullet. So but before we even continue in playing with the LIs, now let's change our parent element, which is the UL, into a grid. So we change the display and we make it a grid. So if we come back and refresh, you can see the same alignment is applying because our ULs or our LIs are also block elements. So by default, they'll go to the next line. So the proof is if we now bring their borders out and we give them, let's say, some margin. Let's avoid the margin for now. So let me keep this one pink. So we can see them here. So there's some margin at the left that is actually pushing them. So, but we still see that they are block elements. So what if I change their display and say I want them to be inline block? So they are still a block. They are still standing as block. So what if I change as inline? They still stand as block. So what if I remove this grid from here? Now you see the effect. So that's what I was saying. As soon as we use the grid, the display grid on the parent, the children will be laid out simply in one column like this, one after the other. So that's what's happening here. No matter what display we choose for the LIs, so it doesn't matter, they'll be displayed as rows. They'll be displayed as rows in one whole column. So let me eliminate the margin around margin 0. So that we get it very well. So they are displayed. So we can decide to say, okay, now by default you have just one column. When we have like two columns, so we use this the rule called grid template columns. So it comes into the grid template columns to tell you the CSS how many columns it should set on inside that container, and then the grid template rows to tell the CSS, I mean the browser, how many rows it should set for that content. So basically what it means, if you set a certain number of rows and columns, so here in our case we set 2 columns and probably 3 rows, we are saying whatever content we have inside should be position should be placed throughout these columns and rows or these cells. So if we come back and we say grid template columns, and I decide to say we want 2 columns, and to indicate that we want 2 columns, we have to indicate 2 units. So the first unit is the first column's width, and the second unit is the second column's width. So let us assume I decide to say the first column is going to be 25% of the viewport of the available space. Then the second one will take 75%. So let's preview and see what happens. And you can see. So it has divided it into 2 rows and 1 column. We actually set 2 columns, right? We set 2 columns, but we have 3 elements. So like I said earlier, it will try to pick all our content and place them inside the cells. So because we demanded for 2 cells, which is 2 columns, it will place the first one in the first cell, the second element in the second cell. But since there's no third cell, the third element, automatically the grid will generate another row and place it inside with the same length as the first column we had. I mean the first element we had. So if I eliminate one of the elements here, you can see we get the two columns. So this can be very handy. Remember, if we are to look at this navigation we had here, it's still great. So imagine you have one column, second, third, fourth, fifth. All you have to do is just define their various weights. So if I say, for example, let me bring back, and we want all these ones to be aligned at the same on the same line, or so we'll say 25, 25%. So obviously it will be left with 50%. So the one in the middle will be keeping that space. You can see you can achieve the same navigation principle we have with simple grid. So that just happened with, let's say, two lines. That's how powerful the grid element can be. So now we can also decide to give it a certain number of rows and so by using the row before. Okay, so let's even check that. So we'll keep it to, let's keep what we had, so two columns, and then we want rows. We also want, let's say, 25% and 75%. So by doing that, we are actually defining a kind of square. So you can see it here. And this is another problem with the percentage unit. So once you use the percentage unit, you kind of build a rigid grid, so which does not which is not flexible, which does not follow the content in it. It just sticks to that particular width. So because of that, there is a unit that the grid offers us, which is the fraction unit, and it is used as FR fraction. So it means 25th of fraction. So that's going to be too much. So let's say this one will take one fraction and this one will take three fractions. So this one too will take one fraction and this one takes three fractions. So basically it doesn't matter the numbers you use there. What matters is you are actually dividing it into 2 and 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3. So you are actually saying the first column should be just one fraction. Whatever unit the browser is going to use to make that fraction, you should use it, but it should be half, I mean, one of it, and the remaining should be to take the three of it. So basically, it's like I'm saying take 1% and then the remaining 90% to deal with it. So this is basically the thing, and here you can see that the content is actually being contained very well. And here already you can see you have a nice concept which could allow you to lay out your website nicely. So there are many possibilities, so many things to discover about the CSS Flex and the CSS Grid. I will urge you to go and dig about them, take your time and practice a lot about them. So this is just an introduction to give you the taste and also let you know that there are these possibilities out there for you to use it and build fantastic designs. So thank you so much for sticking around again. Kindly consider liking and subscribe to our channel, and probably share it with all your friends. And thank you again.